Dr. G here, taking your questions. We're looking at questions about television and common cultural change, COM 4413, and taking in some questions from Kimberly. And she's writing about Jason Mattel's Television in American Culture book, and it'll be I'm interested to respond to this pair of questions. On page 127, quote, journalism had shifted away from a model of partisan advocacy and explicit political engagement and toward a professional code of objectivity and nonpartisan reporting, end quote. When did we make the shift back? She writes, was it with cable news networks like CNN and Fox? To which I wrote in all caps, ha! Right? And so this is where context is important for us, of course. And when it's talking about some movement, some paradigm shift, or some organic shift in the way content is produced or presented to us, let's always pause and look at where the information's coming from. All right. So, Television in American Culture, a really excellent, well-written, well-researched book. However, one of the earlier editions, 2010, all right, and with maybe a next edition, 2012. I'd have to double check that. I don't want to make anything up, but so we're possibly looking at content released at this point in time a decade ago. And knowing, if you know anything about book publishing, potentially manuscript drafts of this were written as early as 2008, right? It's highly likely. So the question is about a contradiction in how seemingly we see media today, because we've continued to see those shifts. Yes. And so that's significant, right? We can recognize sometimes we'll find a phrase, a wording, maybe a theorization or whatever, from an older work. It's outdated to the way things are now. It doesn't necessarily devalue it, but always recognize the potential where we can go in and critique something. It is not against the law for us to, call something out when shifts have altered its meaning, or if we simply disagree. That's part of joining the conversation amongst these sort of scholars and idea leaders. On page 154, how can it be okay for campaigns to run the smear ads? Doesn't this go beyond freedom of speech? And good call there, right? But let's remember, libel and slander, these are only legal issues, right? It's a matter of personal or party ethics, which in large part have seemingly become ignored or used for any number of interpretive moves. We're at a strange place. I remember the way that libel and slander and ethics, particularly in the political arena, were taught to me in grade school, and then in junior high, maybe reinforced in high school, and perhaps you get that one more repetition early in college. And the way it was taught to me so that I would think about that was on a very ethical level, right? Weighing the stakes and taking it serious. What I've seen the majority of my adult life is a lot of constant manipulation of that, and what we call dirty politics. So the smear campaigns are just common practice. It's one of those things. It's good for business. It's not just smear ads anymore. We saw outright, live trolling at presidential debates in recent years, and so this is a reason people are so turned off. But at the same time, there's just an odd kind of ironic hypocrisy of people are turned off by the way politicians act, so they're all behind kind of outlier figures. But then those outlier figures are practicing some of the toxic aspects of politics that give it the bad, the black eye to begin with. What? So vicious cycles, right? It's about all we can say. In terms of Mattel's introduction to complex TV, culture question, Page 24, Chekhov's gun sounded a bit like foreshadowing, but as I read on, it seems more like Chekhov's gun is a specific element, whereas foreshadowing is more of a hint of things to come. Is that correct? That's a good way of looking at it. Let's think about this. Chekhov's gun works like a kind of plot device that creates tension in a narrative, but may or may not resolve. Unlike foreshadowing, which foreshadowing by its existence is pointing towards something that will transpire, that will take place. Unless, of course, the foreshadowing is a red herring, which does happen from time to time. Rachel has a few questions I want to get to, starting with Chapter 4, Televised Citizenship from Mattel's TV and American Culture. Has freedom of speech and authorization to reveal scandals within the government been taken away little by little over the years by the government itself? And, the government, big G government, that's tricky because our government constantly is in turnover. We have these election cycles, politicians come and go. Now, many of them groom replacements, that sort of thing. They have close relations with the constituencies. Many politicians are what we call career politicians. They stay in there for long periods of time. So some people will stay in fashion a really long, like a lifetime. Others may come and go more quickly. Ultimately, here's what I wrote. There is a rampant and intentional destabilization at work. Hey, maybe, right? Many would suggest there's a lot of cynical work going on. And so when that's taking place, we all feel like we're on the outside. Unless, of course, we're getting to go to, private parties and fundraisers with these politicians and we're in their ear and we own giant, companies and stuff like that. 2, is it possible for news media outlets to ever go back to unbiased reporting or for agenda setting to be done away with? Will it continue to get worse? Will fake news take over our world? This is the dangerous thing that we could hang our hat on. All right. The most likely scenario is if it becomes profitable, these quality ethics, right? This dry interest in objective news or a kind of movement away from sensationalism in media, which is counterintuitive to how media works. But if it becomes profitable, that could be the trigger that could get us going in that direction. We're in a cycle right now that's difficult to break. But let's talk about complex TV in the introduction, as well as chapters 1 and 2. What aspects go into a show with low ratings or low viewer ratings or low viewer ratings being renewed over a more successful show? And the wording there is a little bit tricky, kind of difficult to follow, but I'll create some commentary here. Factors that go into a show that are considered for renewal. And someone else asked about this sort of bubble show, right? Shows that are on the verge of getting canceled versus what can save a show. You have to consider these kinds of factors. The cost of the show, right? Some shows far more expensive than other shows. Cheaper show, more likely to stay on the air. More expensive show, it better have a really strong audience. So next area I thought about where or who a program is popular with. All right. So let's take a series. I think Mattel, maybe some others write about it, that we get a little exposure to, The West Wing. This was that political show that aired on NBC in the late 90s into the early 2000s. And because it was a very dignified primetime adult drama about the White House and political issues. Almost the whole series was written by creator Aaron Sorkin, who's a very strong, prominent, accomplished writer in film and television. And it appealed to a wealthy demographic of audience members. So while it was never the highest rated show on TV, maybe hovering in that top 25 kind of category, it appealed, its demographic, it appealed to the most wealthy viewers on TV, and the most wealthy viewers were sought after by advertisers, and thus they could charge the most for the ads, even if it wasn't the most watched show. So thus it was a show that the network protected and kept around, even past the creator's exit, right? In which the show's tone and kind of magic really seemed to kind of disappear. But also, number of years on air could be a factor as well. There are certain rules about production and certain, guidelines, or just industry norms. The longer it's on the air, the more costly it becomes for natural reasons. Cast demands more, or just production cost inflation and so on. And there's a magic number. It's usually around the year 5. And after about the 5th year, 100 episodes in, it becomes extremely profitable because it can be sold into syndication, meaning the reruns can be sold to other places. That's an old norm. Now we see shows readily finishing, first season, second season, whatever, and then they're instantly available on some streaming app. Well, that's another way that the producers are generating revenue, and it doesn't necessarily rely on the syndicated model. And it also may help protect those smaller viewed shows, which really is all shows now, because there's so much content out there and so much fragmentation, media fragmentation, audience fragmentation. With so many apps and gadgets like the Fire Stick, how much longer should we expect cable or satellite to be around? As long as they're profitable, right? It sounds like a broken record, I know, money, 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 but it really is true. It's a business. The entertainment industry is an industry. It's a for-profit industry at that. So as long as the show is profitable, it will continue. But also, not just a show, but cable, satellite, right? And let's remember this: some of us in metropolitan areas have really gotten used to the comfort and the luxury of high-speed internet and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of rural pockets in the U.S. still that need cable, or they need like satellite, right, to get access to certain kinds of media. And let's take DirecTV, for example. Well, DirecTV is owned by AT&T, so in AT&T in the metropolitan areas is giving you UVerse. In the country, you might be getting, satellite. And so this is that misnomer about, finding the right media provider, or sticking it to the man by cutting the cord. We're still paying, a ton of money to ultimately, the same 5-6 media corporations. They're just giving us different options, right? In the name of competition and profit. How can a series like The Young and the Restless be a serialized show, yet be inconsistent with its characters and their looks and identities, but still be successful? So, compound question. Let's think about the slow progress of time in the narrative. But let's look at Marvel movies, right? These like people that have been playing the same superhero for a decade now or longer, and allegedly not much time has changed, but they've aged a bunch. We see this all the time in fiction, right? But let's flip it around. Loyal audiences. The audience crave the characters, the stories. They want more. They want to see them continue. And then most importantly, here's a free, willing suspension of disbelief, right? We do this all the time. This is how you go to a stage play and you can pretend that the protagonist, that lead actor is a child in one scene, and then midlife the next, and an old person in another. As long as the narrative is rich and we're willing to follow along, it can continue and prosper. What is the biggest difference between producer and a director of a project? Producer, think money or controlling, making sure things stay on budget. Director, vision or execution, constant communication with all the parties involved. Are reality shows preconceived? Spoiler alert. Yes. Do these series have writers, even if it is supposed to be a day in the life of? Spoiler alert. Yes. And so, that's one avenue that one could go into the entertainment industry, right? If you have a hankering for that sort of thing. Let's take another break. We'll be back to finish up our digital dialogue.